All right, hello, my dear young friends. Welcome once again to CHRTC 309. This is the Sociology of Youth and Religion one more time. All right, so here we're going to keep looking at some of this data that just came in from Springtide Research Institute, specifically, looking at what is the effect of these sacred moments that they were cataloging in their State of Young People and Religion 2023 report. Okay, so this is data from the 2022 version of the State of Youth or of Religion and Young People from Springtide Institute, and I've just pulled out one kind of little piece here to show you. All right, so when we talk about flourishing, or we could say like life outcomes, right? What do we kind of see here? Not as robust a way of asking the question as I think what Smith and Denton or Smith and Snell did, in the National Study of Youth and Religion. But we're not perfect, so let's dive into it. Okay, so they categorized three things on these infographics. Those who say they're flourishing a lot in kind of various spheres of life. The very religious in dark blue, the not religious at all, and the disparity here. Now, I think what's important here, is that these disparities are quite significant. Not all of these numbers are great. Certainly, the fact that the religious youth in these samples say that they are flourishing more than their non-religious peers is, I think, pretty significant. Okay, so let's just kind of look through it. Okay, so in romantic relationships, right, 37% of those who were very religious said they were flourishing versus 23% who were not, right, for a 14% gap, double digits. Very statistically significant. In friendships, almost half of the very religious said they were flourishing. Same thing with family relations, right? It's right on the cusp of half, kind of within the margin of error there. Much lower numbers for those who are not religious at all, right? 34% and 28%. Relationships with trusted adults, 41% said they were flourishing a lot in these relationships versus 16% for those who are not religious at all, right? And that's a 25% gap. That is extremely large, right? So here, in this space, again, I would love to see that all those numbers over 50% or even higher. But, 16% is not a good number. And that 25% gap suggests that in this sphere, and in all these spheres really, our most religious youngsters are doing much better. Okay. Same here, right? And these categorizations are not as granular as Smith and Denton's, right? With their 4 types. Unfortunately, we don't know what the middle parts of this chart look like. But whatever, we can only work with what we have sometimes. All right, so young people who say they're flourishing a lot at work, right? 34% versus 14, again for a 20% gap. At home, right? 51%. So we're in majority territory for our very religious, 29%, very 22% gap for the not religious at all. In finances, right, a little over a third say they're flourishing versus 14% not religious at all. Physical health and wellness, again, 42% versus 20%, 22% gap. In my mental health, 42%. So that's, a concerning number. I would love to see that number much higher than it is. If only 42% feel like they're flourishing a lot in their mental health, that has me concerned. But our not religious at all sample at 18%, that is a troubling number, right? In my social life and online life, 42% flourishing a lot versus 27% for the not religious at all. Again, for all these gaps are in the double digits. So I think consistent with Smith and Denton's work, right, the very religious are thriving much more than the non-religious. Again, which is a bit of a space for concern. Okay, so the Springtide people, in the survey that they sent out, they asked a couple of questions which they were kind of using to judge, some of these questions of well-being. Like how did these sacred moments affect young people, the young people who said they had them, right? So they asked things like, how did sacred moments change you, if at all? And what, if anything, did you gain from the experience? And they said that basically the sacred moments that were observed in young people altered their lives for the better in three ways. So it offered them direction, right? It offered them some sense of a path to go down. It imbued their lives with meaning, right? And it gave them a sense of peace. And we'll talk about those in each of them in their turn. So, in the previous section, we talked a lot about questions of flourishing, right? In well-being and flourishing, when we're talking about the national study of youth and religion, there's all this data on, I guess Smith and Denton, and then Smith and Snell, sort of talk about it in terms of life outcomes. Now, the Springtide data, broadly suggests much the same thing, right? That the young people who are more religious, on the whole, tend to be doing better. And, in their, State of Youth and Religion 2022 report, that was a big theme, was that, those who were kind of listed as the most religious in their sample were the ones that in lots of ways were doing the best, right? They were the happiest. So, this kind of carries over into all of this stuff on sacred moments in, I think, really interesting and important ways, right? So, basically, so you can see it on the chart here, right? Percentages of young people who have experienced a sacred moment and say that they are, either not religious or slightly religious, among those are, okay, so those who are not religious, broadly speaking, were not doing as well, right? Even if they had experienced a sacred moment. So religion, again, does seem to matter. Now, the numbers here, I think, are pretty good. I actually don't worry about this as much as I do some of the other numbers. Okay, but let's look at it in general here. Okay. So, percentage of young people have experienced a sacred moment and say they are, at least slightly religious and are flourishing in general, right? 85% compared to 75% of the not religious. So a 10% gap, which is a significant gap. More of them feel like they have at least one place they belong if they're at least slightly religious. A 6% gap, a 7% gap in, those who are satisfied with their life as a whole. Now, for both, they're pretty satisfied with their lives as a whole, right? 85% versus 92, but there is a gap. Find things they do in life worthwhile. 94 versus 86, right? An 8% gap. That's pretty statistically significant. And feel fully seen and understood by at least one person in their life. Now, 77, I don't think is a great number for that, because I think young people really need to feel like they're understood, to feel like they are flourishing, but it's not a terrible number either, right? 69% is a less good number, certainly. We're getting into the territory where almost a third of young people, who are not religious, don't feel like they're understood by at least one person. Okay, so some other kind of interesting questions that Springtide Institute sort of asked about those who had sacred moments versus those who had not experienced a sacred moment. And what did the experience do to them? How are those who had experienced a sacred moment different than those who had not experienced a sacred moment? Okay, so basically they've got sort of 4 categories here. And again, as with the last slide, these numbers are, it's nice to see these percentages so high across all of these categories. To me, that is a very, very encouraging thing in general. Okay, so those who said they had experienced a sacred moment were more likely by an 11% margin, 83 versus 72%, to say they were open to changing important beliefs in the face of new information. So they have a little bit more intellectual flexibility. And possibly because whatever this sacred, I'm theorizing here now. This would require a lot more research, I think, to say this definitively, but I'm theorizing. My guess would be that these sacred or like pinnacle moments probably makes you feel more secure in the general framework of whatever it is you believe, so that then the specifics of truth claims within that are probably more open to negotiation without threatening the entire system, right? So if, say, you've had a sacred moment that assures you that Jesus loves you, or whatever, right? Let's take the stereotypical, you feel a deep connection with God and you feel the truth of your beliefs. And then you go off to university and you encounter, a biology class where they teach you about biological evolution, which is different from the model that you had growing up. Okay. Cool beans, right? It's probably easier for you to still feel secure in the overall structure of those beliefs because you have a deep kind of personal moment that grounds your experience of the sacred in ways that you're probably less likely to find to someone who hasn't had it, right? So your important beliefs can change without threatening whatever the core belief system is. That would be my kind of interpretation of what is going on here, right? You're more secure. You're more secure, right? And your own beliefs are less threatened by new information, right? You can be a little bit more adaptable. You can change core beliefs without dumping the whole system as compared to someone who maybe hasn't had that kind of sacred moment. Okay, I mean, it's still 72% of those who haven't had a sacred moment who say they would change their beliefs. So it's not like a 50% split, but still, I think statistically significant. Okay, don't take it personally when someone contradicts their most important beliefs. Again, a 12% gap here. And I do, this is a significant thing, right? So people are, again, probably more secure in their beliefs. So when, you don't feel like you have to prove your beliefs as much because you yourself feel fairly confident in them. You don't feel especially threatened. That would be, again, my read on this. But to drill down into that, I think would take more qualitative work and probably more quantitative work as well. Believe it is important to contribute to society. There's a huge gap here, right? 82% for those who haven't had a sacred moment, and 88%, which means it's a majority position. And then you're probably looking at, maybe it's that connectional, relational aspect of sacred moments. It's like, okay, I'm connected to all of these people in important ways, so it's important for me to contribute to society. And believe it's important to help society in general. And we're talking a 7% gap. Those who've had sacred experiences much more likely to move in that direction. All right, so we had our three ways that sacred moments sort of benefit the young people who have them, right? Right. So the first one was in terms of the direction of their lives, right? So young people said that sacred moments resulted in what they felt like was positive momentum, right? Like they're moving forward, right? Something's carrying them, right? It affirmed something. A sense that in that moment, something, whether an internal or external circumstance, had improved greatly. So something gets better, right? Even though, it's probably true is that external circumstances are unlikely to actually change, but somehow the experience of a sacred moment. And right, again, a lot of these, I think what's interesting here, a lot of these are not like maybe stereotypically happy clappy, right? Like you went off to summer camp and you felt the move of the Holy Spirit and everything was great and now everything's more great. When you dig into the report that Springtide has, a lot of these are kind of tragic, right? Grandpa's dying. You're accompanying your sibling. One of the interview cases, someone accompanying their sibling through their struggle with anorexia, right, and describing that whole journey of moments as sacred. A lot of these are traumatic and difficult moments, but something about sacred moments ultimately makes them feel like they've changed, right? Like the circumstances themselves have kind of changed. And I mean, for me, it's a little bit hard to wrap my head around this as a sociologist, right? It's like there's obviously an internal psychological state that's being affected by these kinds of sacred moments, right? Um, so, I do think that's really interesting. Um, or some external circumstance have been improved, and again, it might be in the perception of it, right? Um, so I mean, it's tough to explain. I actually don't have, I think, the best explanation for this, but this was pretty consistent in their data. Okay, it helped them feel better in their skin, right? It puts you at ease with who you are, and the next one, proud of who they are becoming, right? It securitizes your sense. It gives you what I mean. Let's go with a big sociology kind of phrase here. It sort of contributed to ontological security. Ontological security, right? A security in who they were, that they're okay in their own skin, and proud of the person they're becoming. And I think it would be a mistake to understate how important that could be to young people, right? We are talking about young people between 13 and 25, especially in the younger range of that, right? So much awkwardness, so much difficulty as you differentiate from your parents, as you become your own person. As things, I think, fundamentally change for you, how positive that could be. Okay, and there's a reframing effect, right? A move from negative or more neutral emotions to positive ones, right? So you move from, maybe, feeling kind of neutral about things to feeling overall kind of positive about them. Again, I think that's important. I think it makes sense. And definitely that kind of reframing of even experiences and moments into things with more positive emotions would have kind of beneficial psychological effects if you even if you don't believe in the existence of a sort of spiritual realm. Okay, so meaning making, right? Hey, I got my little Buddha statue here. Gotta get that Buddhist content in while it's hot. Sacred moments, they're joy inducing and at least life changing. Maybe, totally transformative, but at least, they pivot the direction of someone's life. So it's interesting, again, with the kind of joy inducing aspect. Because, again, in a lot of cases, these were tragic circumstances that people were living through. So, I mean, let me read you a couple of quotes from the report itself. Morgan 15 said, life would be less meaningful without sacred moments. They make you appreciate the good things in life, right? Okay. So they're meaningful, right? They give meaning. Riley Elaine, Elaine, 23, said her experience of the sacred led her to change how she thinks about who she is in relations to others. Right? My sacred moment connected me with a wider perspective. I'm not getting so wrapped up in my own head and my own life anymore. I'm caring about other people more, and I have a more eternal perspective that gives me hope. Right? So it provided meaning. It kind of got this person out of their own head, out of their sort of subjective experience, and into a kind of broader perspective, which I mean, I think is really valuable, right? How often are our personal problems, somehow connected to the fact that we get, too much in our own heads? I think probably more often than most of us would care to admit. Yeah, so these moments have the power to make life more meaningful. They're life-changing. They make it feel like even the mundane is somehow meaningful, and I think that matters, right? Sort of guarding against nihilism, right, which is definitively kind of possible, especially as maybe the sacred canopy of the world has sort of been stripped away, right? We talked about this when we talked about Peter Berger at the beginning of the course. This idea that religion used to offer a sort of meaning system within which the rest of the universe is sort of made to make sense. Like the chaos, the horrors of life, right? The tragedy, and life is I think undeniably kind of tragic in lots of ways. And religion used to offer this sort of sacred canopy over all of us, over all of society, that offered meaning within that. As that canopy's been stripped away, right? And as modernity, perhaps, if you want to believe Berger's account of it, has sort of punched holes in the sacred canopy, as we don't all share a worldview. We don't have a simple code that we can all go to sort of make meaning out of anything anymore. Sacred moments seem to kind of put that back in place. So, maybe, we can borrow a term from Christian Smith, though it's not the way he intended it, I think. This idea of the sacred umbrella, right? That a sacred moment is sort of like handing someone a sacred umbrella, right? Under the protection of that sacred moment, that sacred umbrella, you can have, it imbues certain things with meaning that otherwise might get washed away in the sort of, quasi-nihilism that's implied by kind of late modern culture, right? That nothing means anything because we've lost that sacred canopy. So I think that's, I think at least a plausible explanation for kind of what's going on there. The other one that they said, and it was kind of important to them, was it offered peace, right? A feeling of kind of everything feeling better, right? Quiet. So yeah, some of them said, sacred moments felt good and helped them reflect on their lives. And a lot of them recall what they might call like a holy silence, a no chatter, no devices, no notification kind of moment. Melanie, Melanie, an interesting one. She has a good quote here, and it says Melanie didn't like going to church, but recalls going to the chapel in high school provided her with a much needed break. And she says, I guess all of it in the moment was just like, wow, I got to appreciate it because I wasn't looking at my phone or my laptop or anything. I got to appreciate the simple things like the glass, the statues, the seats, even though they weren't really super comfortable. But I was able to appreciate the quiet too, because you know how it is in high school. Everybody's chatting about something, so being able to be alone and just have that quietness where I don't have to really worry about anything was like, wow, this is nice. Okay. Yeah. For some of them, right, the impact of those sacred moments, and especially the emotional impact, was not, from a person or a place, but more about, realizations about their life. Mandy, right? It says here, it was a random flash of recognition of how far she'd come from an unhappy home life and difficult relationship that gave her that emotional calm. At that point in my life, I was about to go to college and finally out of my house. Felt like I had a more secure friend group and relationship and everything. This one time at my old job, it was in the morning, I had gotten some tea from Starbucks. I was just driving and starting feeling really happy about my direction in life and how lucky I was. Okay. So again, like it's not, this is not like the sky opening, and angels coming down and placing loaves of bread at your feet or anything like that. These are, I think, pretty subtle moments. And, really, I find this totally fascinating. Realization about one's life, right? This moment where you see something that you couldn't see before, right? Because we're also caught up in the hustle and bustle of our lives. These sacred moments are kind of a step back and an alternative view. And I think all of this matters, right? Holy silence, especially in the kind of busyness, right, that we find ourselves in on an average day in late modern culture, right? We're so busy and everything is so loud all the time. I do think it kind of matters. These silent moments can connect us to whatever you believe is out there. Okay. Let's conclude on the benefits here. Okay, so what to say? Sacred moments were not, restricted to any particular religious tradition. So young people that were religiously affiliated had them. Those with no religious affiliated had them. Gay, straight, transgender young people had sacred moments, and could be attendant to sort of the spiritual, right? It's not something that's kind of limited, suggesting, right, that it's at least a universalizable kind of human experience, right? Not that everyone has it, but everybody could have it, regardless of where they sit ideologically or religiously or any of these things. So these are not, it's not like Catholics have more of them than Buddhists or any of these things. And actually, as we saw, that's Mormons and evangelicals lead the way, but beyond that, no worries. Young people perceive these as personal, right? These things are meant for them. They're meant for them. Now, they may not have a consistent ideology or understanding or belief system about why they are meant for them. How could they be meant for them? That's not, I think, necessary for any of this to work, but they do feel them, as personal, as somehow this moment was meant for me. They're relational, right? Either with people or they connect them broadly to, a sense of humanity. But in a lot of cases, right, it was in closeness with people they trusted and loved. These kinds of sacred moments. And they're extraordinary, right? Even though, like, reading a lot of these sort of quotes that are in the Springtide account, to me, these seem very mundane, right? These accounts don't seem terribly extraordinary to me, but to the people for whom they happen, they are deeply extraordinary, right? They are something that interrupts the flow of their regular life. So, next one, they're set apart from the ordinary in meaningful ways, right? Something about these experiences makes them special to the people that have them. They're more than discrete experiences that evoke fleeting emotions or reactions. And is this a kind of, Hamlet, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so? Is it how people interpret these that make them not fleeting emotional experiences or reactions? I don't know. I think I need a smarter person than me to ultimately tell me that, or more information. But what we do know, right? And I put this in capitals on purpose. I didn't just hold down the cap lock key accidentally. Sacred moments make the lives of young people better, according to this research, right? Those who have them are flourishing more. They're doing better. It improves their lives. It makes them happier. It makes them feel like they have peace, meaning, and direction. They give rise to emotions and insights, right? They help people see their lives more clearly. And, this is something that everybody could use, right? Everybody could use to see their lives more clearly. Direction, meaning, and peace, especially in a world that often seems chaotic, right? Where those sacred canopies have broken down. If I could hand you a sacred umbrella that gave you a sense of reassurance and peace as you move through at least a chunk of the rest of your life. Now, I don't know that these are going to be permanent, right? I think, a sacred moment that you had when you were 17 or 13 might not carry you through until you're 50. But they're at least, they have a lasting impact, right? And they are, I think, kind of like a sacred umbrella, right? Not in the sense that Smith means it, but in a different sense. And I think one that I also think is interesting. So they're a sacred umbrella. And they have that lasting positive impact. They have a lasting positive impact. And again, I think that matters, right? People feel as though these things matter so much that ultimately they're better for them. And so you should listen. All right, so I don't want to linger on this because I'm not generally in the prescriptive realm, but I'll tell you, sort of, what the Springtide folks say. Their kind of conclusions is, look, spirituality seems to make a difference, right, for young people. Especially, and young people of all stripes that are having all sorts of experiences. So wherever they're coming from, right, it's maybe not a bad idea knowing, what we now know about sacred moments, and I know, because I know my students, I know you all. Some of you want to be lawyers, and I think you're crazy, but, this is like an even split in my students between those who want to be lawyers and those who want to go into mental health fields. counseling and such. Maybe it's because of the youth focus, right? And that's really hot now. But I know my students, and a lot of you are going to end up in mental health fields. Based on this data, you could do a lot worse than suggesting that in whatever way works for them, right? And I'm not recommending a religious tradition here. I'm just saying, think about it this way. Spirituality could be good for them, right? In a non-prescribed way, one that allows them to be free and, do the faith unbundled thing, right? Explore traditions in the way they want. But if they can get to this point of having these sort of sacred moments, right, and exploring them and understanding them through a spiritual lens, this will make their lives better. It won't fix everything, but it can take negative emotions and reframe them as in a positive light and have people, feeling things more positively. So, I think this data suggests there's room to incorporate spirituality more in the way we think about things. And I think that matters a whole lot.